Members of the economic bloc known as BRICS are meeting for a second day in Johannesburg. The alliance is made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Leaders are looking to present BRICS as a counterweight to the West. The war in Ukraine, Russia's foreign isolation, and global economic turmoil dominated the first day of talks on Tuesday. The bloc represents a quarter of the world's economy, a fifth of all trade, and nearly half of the global population. More than 20 countries have applied to join BRICS. Well, African affairs analyst Achike Chude joins us now to discuss the timing of this summit holding in South Africa, the likely gains for the participating nations, especially the developing ones among them, as well as its overall agenda. It's good to have you on a news day.
And it's good to be here too.
Of course. Now, I think the one thing that stood out for me is the fact that at least 40 countries have shown interest in becoming members. 23 have already submitted their application. Some of the countries aspiring to become BRICS members include Argentina, Bangladesh, Bahrain, Cuba, Ethiopia, Indonesia, but Nigeria is also there. What factors do you think contribute to BRICS's attractiveness as a platform for countries seeking to reshape their global economic landscape?
You know, there's a saying that when you keep on repeating the same thing, all the time, hoping for a different result, that it's sheer madness. And so, obviously, a lot of these countries that you have mentioned are countries that are used to a particular economic system. One that is dominated by the Bretton Woods institutions. That is the World Bank and the IMF, and of course, capitalism really as the driving force, free market economy, and all that. And so I think that what is driving this new interest is the failure of this system, in helping to achieve the national interests of these countries, that have participated within that system. And so obviously we've not had a counterweight to what is, happening. There is this global hegemony, essentially, that is dominated by the United States and then other Western countries. For decades now, they have been in control, they have been in charge. And of course, a lot of so many other things have happened within the global, system. The fact that you have two major economic powers today, the United States and China, and then you also, maybe at a military level, you also have United States, and Russia, competing with Russia. And, people have said, if you look at the war in Ukraine, it's also playing a role in this, in the sense that, the normal strategy of the United States has always been to keep Russia and China divided. President Nixon was able to do that, even, at the height of the Cold War, while both countries, China and Russia, were under the, socialism or communism. They successfully divided them. But unfortunately, the war against Russia has ended up pitting these two countries together. And if you look at them, they are the driving force behind this BRICS initiative. They are not small countries. Militarily, Russia is a very strong country. Then China is the second, best performing, country in terms of the, world global economy. And so they have gotten, together. China had an issue, I think, sometime in January. The value of the yuan to the dollar was about 110 yuan to a dollar. About 6 months later, it had gotten to 143 yuan to the dollar. And so many other countries are also having that because their currencies, in order to trade globally, and so you need to contend with the dollar. So I think for them, looking at the future, they are seeing a future that will be more prosperous, that will give them greater economic advantage, outside of, the dollar. And so they are looking at ways where, and that's the essence of this. Apart from even the meeting to expand, in terms of membership and the rest, the objective really is to see how they can wean themselves off the dependence on dollar, and then see how they can be able to perform without, recourse to dollar as the currency for every trade that they want to engage in.
All right. On the sidelines, we're hearing that India is wary of Chinese dominance at BRICS and has warned against rushing into full expansion. What do you make of that scenario here? Yeah, there's been some contradictions. We want this, but it doesn't actually show complete uniformity of purpose here?
No, and I don't think you can get that now. These are early days yet, and of course it takes time. Of course, there is a history between India and China. They have fought a bit of border wars, among themselves, and so there is no love lost, in terms of their relationship. But funnily enough, India has shown, in terms of the Ukrainian war, Russia-Ukraine war, has shown a lot of support, for Russia. China, of course, has also been very supportive of Russia. So they find themselves also maybe having the same kind of disposition towards Russia. So that has brought them a bit closer. The fact that they are even talking at BRICS, tells you that, yes, they are aware of the differences, and there are differences. Even Brazil is singing a completely different in terms of expansion. Brazil is, believes that if you expand, so suddenly, that it might whittle the influence of a BRICS within their, in terms of what they have been doing all this while. So all of these initial apprehensions, it's natural when you're building relationships. You build relationships on the basis of trust. But first of all, you need to do away with some of the old reservations and then see how you can move forward. So I'm not surprised that we're having this. But like I said, what is critical is that they are talking. And that means that there is a desire for them to make it work. And so we would expect that all of these gray areas, would be discussed, and they'll look for a way to settle, because there are bigger objectives, fundamental, objectives that they are pursuing, rather than some of these, things that might get in the way.
Yes, definitely can't overemphasize the importance of dialogue in situations like this. But one of BRICS' significant appeals is their combined economic power, which surpasses that of even the G7 nations in terms of GDP. Despite this, the group holds a smaller share of voting power at institutions like the IMF, for example. So when we look at this imbalance, how do you think it would impact BRICS' efforts to challenging the existing global financial structure?
Yeah, they're also going to set up their own institutions, and that's obviously, if they cannot work well within a particular system, you're talking about, IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, and all of that. They have always been skewed in favor of the developed countries of the world, the Western, essentially the Western. These are Western institutions. So they have always leaned towards, the satiation of the interest of Western, economies, and it is part of the reason why they are looking at they are looking for ways to get out of that stranglehold and then set up their own. For instance, they're also going to have a process for giving out loans to member countries and all that. So they have a bank. They are trying to also establish a development bank and hopefully have greater economic cooperations. So as they do that, as they increase in terms of their influence at the global level, with their systems working, better than anticipated, there will be a diminution in terms of, or reduction in terms of the influence of the, global institutions that you have, talked about. So I think it's about them, sitting down and seeing how they can work to, reduce the influence of the existing global powers, and then also, hopefully increase what they have, especially with new members coming in. And it's going to be a very big problem, especially for the United States, that has always dominated historically. And it also gives you an idea of what is happening, that you no longer have, different countries now dominating at the global stage. It's no longer a unipolar world. You now have a multipolar world, and that is exactly what is, responsible for all of these discussions.
Very good. So Vladimir Putin's virtual appearance, perhaps due to international arrest warrants, as it were, how significant is that? Of course, despite President Cyril Ramaphosa's reluctance to effect that arrest, and how much influence does Russia actually wield within BRICS itself?
Yeah, people might impute some reasons why, Russia did not attend, the international, warrant against him. But I am not exactly sure that is the reason why Putin will not. It's like, for instance, issuing a criminal arrest warrant against the president of the United States, and then he comes into Nigeria or goes into South Africa, and the South African government arrests him. You can imagine the consequences of that. I can tell you that that's not going to happen, because we had issues. Don't forget that some African countries have been having issues with the International Criminal Court. They see their intervention in Africa as purely done on the basis of bias. And don't forget that some of the countries we are talking about today that are insisting on ICC rulings are not members of the ICC. The United States is not a member of the International Criminal Court. They helped to set it up, and that's the contradiction. Russia also is also not a member of the ICC and all that. So sometimes they find themselves above some of these institutions. They want to make sure that they impose the rules of these institutions on other smaller countries rather than on themselves. So, and don't forget that we also had an issue with Omar al-Bashir. He was under, arrest warrant of the International Criminal Court. He attended a meeting in South Africa, and so the South African government was obligated to arrest him, but they didn't arrest him. So I don't think that is actually the reason. Now, there is a war going on in Russia. Perhaps there are other expediencies why Putin is not there, but I think that Russia is, just like the question you're asking, is quite influential. Also, don't forget that at the level of, in terms of the war, in Ukraine, that African countries, when it came to voting against and condemning Russia, quite a bit of African countries abstained and refused to be part. Some openly supported Russia, others abstained. So that gives you an idea of the growing influence of Russia in Africa. Of course, the issue of the Wagner Group, we have talked about that in some West African countries, especially French-speaking West African countries, and some other, parts of in Sudan. They are also there. So there's been over the years a growing influence, of Russian, of Russian activities, in Africa.
Well, looking ahead, what would you say are the potential gains for developing nations that are looking to join the BRICS alliance? And then we focus on our country, Nigeria. I mean, how do you see us, navigating the internal differences and geopolitical challenges to effectively, get to be an advantageous position? We know where we are now with our economy, with fuel subsidy, with everything that is going on in the country now. What would you say our benefits would be from the BRICS alliance?
Beyond the even internal difference or contradictions, I think the geopolitical differences, I think issues, I think that's where we have to look at. I'm even surprised that, but I think it's a good, because you have other countries like Iran and all that, erstwhile enemies, even Saudi Arabia also. We know the relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but they all want to be part of, the BRICS. And so you talk about Nigeria. Obviously, Nigeria, South Africa is there. Some other African countries are angling to be part of BRICS. So the question you'll be asking yourself would be the attitude, because there's also a geopolitical battle going on between the great powers, Russia, China, United States, Europe, and all that. So now you have a situation where Nigeria is heavily indebted to the Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank, IMF, and all that. And then Nigeria is also looking for new partnerships again that the West might frown at. So we are going to see, I think it will be interesting to see the response of the West, especially the United States, towards Nigeria's move towards being a member of the BRICS nation. It will be interesting. Let's see, because they are not going to sit back and they fold their arms and watch a reduction in the influence of the dollar, and then Nigeria that's also indebted to them being part of that system. But then again, there are geopolitical issues going on. The situation in Niger Republic, there's a response, an African response to the exploitation of African countries over the years by, in quote, imperialist, countries that would include the United States, France, and others. And so it's part of the challenge that is going on. But let us just say, but obviously there will be benefits. If they want to believe that the Nigerian government has also looked at the possibility of course, we are looking at using local currencies. In fact, before they even get to the level of having a common currency, that they will use among the BRIC countries. For now, they have to make do with, the use of local currencies to do, trade between one another. And I think we've seen that between China and then, Russia already. So perhaps if we look at it from that perspective, that would also help in terms of helping to show up, not put too much pressure on the Naira. Because as the dollar loses more and more relevance or influence in a particular country, I want to believe that when you look at other economic dynamics, if they are properly, well done, then that has a way of shoring up the value of the local currency.
Perhaps still on currencies that there might have been a little breakthrough here because Brazil is floating the idea of a common BRICS currency, but South Africa is saying that there will be no discussions thoroughly relating to dollar dependence, but they agreed in principle to reduce reliance on dollar for loans. Yes. So to a large extent, I think maybe Dilma Yusuf, the president of their bank, is probably looking into all of that to at least give them some kind of concessions in that regard.
It's not something you can do in a hurry. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things are tied to the dollars, their trade and so many other things. So it's not something you can just wake up and say, look, they already have international trading partners that they have to deal with in terms of, the dollar. They are not just dealing with only BRIC countries right now. So they have other, and that's why they cannot radically win themselves off the dollar, immediately right now.
Well, I mean, we are seeing the BRICS nations sharing it. I just want to really understand how it works on the back end, because we're seeing these nations sharing concerns about potential U.S. sanctions and the weaponization of the dollar now. But how realistic is this shift from reducing reliance on the dollar in favor of bilateral trade using local currencies? And what challenges do you foresee? I mean, you said it's not something that can just happen overnight, but what challenges might they encounter in implementing such changes?
Well, I do not think, I think they have worked it out because, like I said, fine, if maybe we're talking about the bigger economies like China and Russia, but it is something all of them have looked at, and I think that they will have a way around it. I think they have. I won't tell exactly. I'm not exactly sure of the, intricate processes that will follow, but they have looked at it. And they have seen that this can be done. But I think, first of all, they're going to be dealing among themselves. So they cannot deal with those outside of the BRIC nations, because those ones are still, doing their international trade, with the dollar. So when they're able to do it, and don't also forget that some years back, I think, was it with Soludo as the governor of Central Bank, or was it when Yar'Adua was in charge, Nigeria tried to have something with China. To also deal with. But of course, that's what we are talking about, the global dynamics, geopolitical dynamics. The international community came down hard on the Nigerian government, and they had to back off. But when you now have so if a country is isolated, it becomes easier to deal with that country. But when you have different countries at the same time moving in the same direction, it becomes a bit difficult to go after the head.
Still talking about global politics and, of course, the BRICS issue. Russia is keen to show it still has friends, despite the Ukraine aggression and, of course, through BRICS. But its ally, India, is also reaching out to the West. Brazil is also doing same. So we can't be restricted to BRICS alone here. So there lies that balancing act. My friend, I still have, relationship with the West, and we still have what we have to do within the BRICS itself.
There was this German, I'm trying to remember, German Chancellor years back. Years back, before even the First World War. He was one of their greatest chancellors. See, the Kaiser, that was his nickname. They called him the Kaiser. Eventually, Beckenbauer, perhaps because he was so good as a footballer, Franz Beckenbauer was also called the Kaiser. So the Kaisers, the Kaiser had this ability to play one against the other. He was so good at it diplomatically. So he was neither here, he was neither there. So you could not hold him to a particular country. So he had that ability to be able to negotiate, your interest with all parties as much as possible. Be friends with all, and don't have an enemy among. And I think that is what India is also trying to say. That it's not about Russia, it's not about its permanent interest. What is in our interest? As long as we can define what our interest is, if that interest veers towards the West, then they have to go towards the West, because it is the nation state, India, that matters, rather than the sentiment of politicians or whatever. So I think that is what the same thing with Brazil. You can't put, as they say, a common balance. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. So I think that they're trying to live true to that, and that is the way politics, I think, should be played too. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your analysis, African Affairs Analyst Achike Chude. Wow, this has really been enlightening. Thank you for being here on Newsday.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.